The pencil trembled in Mira Langley's fingers as she realized the Vampire King's eyes had opened, and he was staring directly at her sketchbook. She had been in his private chambers for less than an hour, brought here under the pretense of documenting the ancient treaty signing between the vampire courts and the human government. As the official court artist assigned by the Department of Supernatural Affairs, she was supposed to be capturing the formal proceedings, not sneaking glimpses of the most dangerous creature in the modern world while he rested on a velvet chaise near the window, his white hair spilling across dark cushions like moonlight on water. "I can explain," Mira whispered, her heart hammering so violently she was certain he could hear it. Every vampire could hear a racing pulse, but Sovereign Draconis Valdren, the ancient king who had ruled the vampire territories for over 3,000 years, probably heard it like thunder. He rose in a single fluid motion that defied physics, suddenly standing before her though she hadn't seen him cross the space between them. His eyes were the color of fresh blood in certain light, shifting to amber in others, and right now they were fixed on her sketchbook with an intensity that made her skin prickle with awareness. "Show me," he commanded, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. Mira's fingers tightened protectively over the page, but she knew defying him was pointless. Slowly she turned the sketchbook around, revealing the drawing she had been working on for the past 20 minutes. She had captured him in profile, his aristocratic features relaxed in what she had assumed was sleep, his expression almost peaceful. She had paid particular attention to the way shadows played across his pale skin, the sharp line of his jaw, the slight part of his lips. Draconis was silent for a long moment, studying the image with an expression she couldn't read. When he finally looked up at her, something flickered in those strange, shifting eyes. "You made me look vulnerable," he said quietly. "I drew what I saw," Mira replied, finding her voice despite the fear coiling in her stomach. "I'm sorry if I overstepped. I was waiting for the council members to arrive, and you looked so still, and the light was perfect, and I just draw me again." The words cut through her rambling explanation, sharp and unexpected. Mira blinked, certain she had misheard. "What? Draw me again?" Draconis repeated, moving back to the chaise with that same impossible grace. "But this time I will pose for you properly. No one has attempted to capture my likeness in over 200 years. The last artist who tried made me look like a corpse. You, however, have managed something different." He settled back against the cushions, arranging himself with deliberate precision, one arm draped across the armrest, his head tilted slightly to catch the fading evening light that streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The setting sun didn't harm him here. This room was designed with special filtered glass that blocked the harmful UV rays, while allowing the beauty of dusk to illuminate the space. Mira stared at him, clutching her sketchbook to her chest. "The council meeting has been delayed by an hour due to Lord Castellan's late arrival from the European territories," Draconis informed her. "We have time, unless you would prefer to sit in silence waiting." There was a challenge in his voice, subtle but unmistakable. Mira had been working with the Department of Supernatural Affairs for 3 years, ever since her artwork had caught the attention of someone high up in the organization. She had documented werewolf pack structures, Fey court ceremonies, and even a meeting of the ancient sea folk who rarely surfaced in modern times. But vampires had always been different. They were secretive, dangerous, and fiercely protective of their image and privacy. And here was their king, the most powerful vampire in existence, asking her to draw him. "All right," she said, moving to a chair positioned at an angle that would give her a good view. She flipped to a fresh page, her earlier nervousness transforming into the focused calm that always overtook her when she began to work. For several minutes, the only sound in the chamber was the soft scratch of pencil against paper. Mira let herself fall into the familiar rhythm, her eyes moving between the page and her subject, cataloging details. Draconis was impossibly beautiful in the way all vampires were, but there was something else about him, something that went beyond mere physical perfection. There was power in every line of his body, in the way he held himself even in repose. Intelligence and calculation lurked behind those strange eyes, and something else too, a loneliness so profound it made her chest ache. She caught herself adding that emotion to the sketch, letting it soften the harsh angles of his face, and wondered if she was projecting or perceiving something real. "You're very talented," Draconis said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Your file didn't do you justice." Mira's hand paused mid-stroke. "You read my file?" "I read the files of everyone who enters my domain," he replied, as if this were the most obvious thing in the world. "You graduated top of your class from the Academy of Fine Arts. You specialize in portraiture and have an apparently innate ability to capture emotional resonance in your subjects. You lost your parents in a car accident when you were 19. You have no living relatives. You live alone in a small apartment in the arts district, and you spend most of your free time in museums or drawing in coffee shops. The casual recitation of her life details should have felt invasive, but his tone was matter-of-fact rather than sinister. Still, Mira felt exposed, vulnerable in a way that had nothing to do with being alone in a room with a vampire king. That's a fairly comprehensive summary, she managed. I'm thorough. He paused, then added, You were sketching me before when you thought I was sleeping. Why? Mira's cheeks heated. I told you. The light was good and you looked. I wasn't sleeping. Draconis interrupted gently. I was aware of your presence the moment you entered the room. I wanted to see what you would do. The pencil nearly slipped from her fingers. You were testing me, observing, he corrected. There's a difference. You could have sat quietly and waited. You could have explored the room. There are several priceless artifacts here that would interest someone with your appreciation for art and history. Instead, you chose to draw me, even though you must have known it could be considered a breach of protocol. I'm sorry, Mira said automatically. Don't be. Draconis shifted slightly, his gaze intense. I'm curious about what compelled you. Was it simply the artistic opportunity or something else? Mira considered the question seriously, returning her attention to the sketch to avoid the weight of his stare. Both, I suppose. You looked peaceful, which seemed at odds with everything I'd been told about you. The vampire king, the ancient terror, the immortal sovereign who had crushed rebellions and ruled with an iron fist for millennia. But lying there, you just looked like someone who was finally getting a moment of rest. It made me wonder about the weight of everything you carry. The silence that followed her words was heavy, charged with something she couldn't quite name. When she glanced up, Draconis was watching her with an expression that was almost hungry, but not in the way she would have expected from a vampire. Do you know how long it's been since someone looked at me and saw a person rather than a monster or a political power to be courted or feared? He asked softly. Mira's throat tightened. I can't imagine. Neither can I, anymore. The years blur together after enough centuries. He was quiet for a moment, then said, May I see the progress? She hesitated, then turned the sketchbook so he could view it. She had captured more detail this time, the elegant structure of his face, the way his white hair caught the light, the ancient sorrow in his eyes that she suspected he didn't realize he was showing. Draconis rose and crossed to her chair, moving behind her to study the drawing over her shoulder. His presence was overwhelming this close, the scent of him like old books in winter air and something indefinably other. Mira forced herself to remain still, to breathe normally, even as every instinct screamed at her to flee or freeze. You see too much, he murmured, his breath stirring her hair. This is dangerous, Mira Langley. I only draw what's there, she whispered. That's precisely the problem. His hand came to rest on the back of her chair, not touching her but close enough that she could feel the displaced air. The court will arrive soon. We should discuss the protocol for tonight's proceedings. He moved away, returning to a more professional distance, and Mira felt like she could breathe again. For the next 20 minutes, Draconis outlined what would be expected of her during the treaty signing. She would be positioned to the side, free to sketch the proceedings, but not to interfere or speak unless directly addressed. The treaty was a formality. Vampires and humans had coexisted in an uneasy peace for decades, ever since the great revelation of 1952 when supernatural beings had revealed themselves to humanity. But every 50 years the treaty was renewed and updated, and this year's version included new provisions about territory boundaries and feeding rights. The council members began arriving precisely on time, sweeping into the chamber in a rustle of expensive fabrics and ancient power. There was Lady Seraphine Nightborn, pale and ethereal with silver eyes that seemed to look through Mira rather than at her. Lord Castellan Darkmoor, who had delayed the meeting, arrived with profuse apologies and the predatory grace of a born hunter. Several others followed, each one radiating the kind of supernatural presence that made Mira's human instincts scream danger. She positioned herself in the designated corner, sketchbook ready, and began to work. Her job was to create a visual record of the evening, capturing not just the formal signing but the dynamics between the participants. It was delicate work, requiring her to be simultaneously invisible and acutely observant. As the discussions began, Mira found her attention drawn repeatedly to Draconis. He commanded the room effortlessly, his voice calm but carrying absolute authority. The other vampires deferred to him, but she could sense the undercurrents of tension, the careful political maneuvering. This wasn't just a treaty signing, it was a display of power, a reminder of the hierarchy that governed vampire society. She sketched Lady Seraphine's calculating expression as she proposed amendments to the territorial boundaries. She captured Lord Castellan's barely concealed ambition when he suggested changes to the succession laws. And through it all, she drew Draconis, the way he listened with perfect stillness, the subtle shifts in his posture that betrayed his thoughts to someone who was paying attention. The meeting stretched past midnight, which meant nothing to vampires but left Mira fighting exhaustion. She had filled dozens of pages with studies and detailed compositions, her hand cramping but her focus unwavering. When the treaty was finally signed, each council member adding their mark with ceremonial blood quills, Mira captured that moment with particular care, knowing it would be the centerpiece of the official record. As the council members departed, exchanging final pleasantries and thinly veiled threats, Draconis caught her eye across the room. He gave a subtle nod toward a side door, then excused himself from the remaining guests. Mira wasn't sure if she was supposed to follow, but something in that glance compelled her. She gathered her materials and slipped through the door he had indicated, finding herself in a smaller, more intimate space lined with books and artwork. Draconis was standing by a window, looking out at the city lights spread below them. "You survived your first major court gathering," he said without turning around. "How do you feel?" "Exhausted," Mira admitted, "and like I've been walking on a knife's edge all night." "An accurate assessment. My court is not a safe place for humans." Now he did turn, his expression serious. "You handled yourself well. Your presence was appropriately unobtrusive, and your work is excellent. I reviewed some of your sketches while you were focused on Lady Seraphine's dramatics. You could see them from across the room. Vampire vision." He tapped near his eye. "One of the few benefits of this existence. May I see the full collection?" Mira crossed to him, offering the sketchbook. He leafed through the pages slowly, pausing on certain images, his expression thoughtful. When he reached the earlier sketch, the one she had made when she thought he was sleeping, he stopped. "This one," he said quietly. "This is the one that captures truth. The others are technically perfect, politically appropriate documentation. But this one shows something real." "I didn't have time to overthink it," Mira said. "I just drew what I felt." "And what did you feel?" The question hung between them, heavy with implication. Mira knew she should deflect, should give some professional, diplomatic answer. Instead, she found herself telling the truth. "I felt like I was seeing someone who had forgotten how to rest, who carried so much weight that even a moment of peace looked foreign on him. And I felt sad, because no one should have to live like that, even if they've lived for thousands of years." Draconis closed the sketchbook carefully, handing it back to her. His fingers brushed hers in the exchange, and she felt a jolt of something electric race up her arm. "You should go home," he said, his voice rougher than before. "It's late and you've fulfilled your obligations for the evening. My driver will take you." "I can take the subway." "My driver will take you," he repeated, in a tone that brooked no argument. "The city is not safe for humans alone at this hour, especially not for one who has spent the evening surrounded by vampire scent. Other supernatural creatures will be drawn to you." Mira hadn't considered that, and the thought made her shiver. "Thank you." She started toward the door, then paused. "Draconis, can I ask you something?" "You may ask. I may not answer." "Why did you really ask me to draw you again?" "It wasn't just about the art, was it?" He was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't respond. Then quietly he said, "When you looked at me, you saw a person. I wanted to know if that perception would survive sustained contact, or if you would eventually see only the monster. Consider it another test if you like. And did I pass?" His smile was small, almost sad, with unexpected flying colors. "Which is precisely the problem. Go home, Mira Langley, get some rest. And perhaps consider whether you truly wish to continue this assignment." The dismissal was clear, but his words haunted her all the way down in the private elevator, through the underground garage where a sleek black car waited with a driver who didn't speak or make eye contact, and during the entire ride to her apartment. She stumbled into her small studio, exhausted and confused, and collapsed into bed still wearing her clothes. She dreamed of blood-red eyes and white hair, and a voice asking her to draw him again and again and again. The next morning, Mira woke to find an envelope had been slipped under her door. Inside was a formal request from the Department of Supernatural Affairs, asking her to continue as the official artist for the Vampire Court for the duration of the treaty implementation period. It would mean weekly visits to document various proceedings and negotiations. The pay was substantial, enough to finally allow her to move to a better apartment and maybe even open her own gallery. Attached to the official request was a smaller, personal note written in elegant script on heavy paper. "If you accept, know that you will be under my personal protection. No member of my court or any other supernatural being will be permitted to harm you. But protection comes with proximity, and proximity is dangerous in ways that have nothing to do with fangs or blood. Choose wisely." Mira stared at the note for a long time, tracing the letters with her fingertip. Every rational part of her brain screamed that she should decline, should walk away from the Vampire King and his sad eyes, and the way he made her feel things she had no business feeling for someone so far beyond human. Instead, she found herself drafting her acceptance, her hand steady as she wrote. 3 days later, she was back in the vampire court, this time to document a negotiation session between Draconis and representatives from the human government. The meeting was held in a different chamber, this one clearly designed to impress and intimidate, with vaulted ceilings and walls covered in tapestries that depicted ancient vampire victories. Mira sat up in her designated corner, but before the human delegation arrived, Draconis appeared at her side. "You came back," he said. "The pay was too good to refuse," she replied lightly, though they both knew it was more than that, of course. His expression was unreadable. "The humans will likely be nervous. They usually are, despite decades of peaceful coexistence. Try to capture their fear. It will be useful for future reference." "You want me to document their weakness?" "I want you to document truth," he corrected, "which includes fear, hope, ambition, and everything else that drives human behavior. It's the same thing you did with my court members during the treaty signing. You showed their calculations, their hunger for power. It was remarkable work." The praise warmed her more than it should have. "I'll do my best." The negotiations were tense and exhausting, stretching for hours as both sides debated resource allocations and territorial access. Mira filled page after page, capturing the rigid posture of the lead human negotiator, the cold amusement in Lady Seraphine's eyes, the careful neutrality Draconis maintained even as the humans made increasingly unreasonable demands. When the meeting finally ended with no resolution, both sides agreeing to reconvene in a week, Mira was surprised when Draconis dismissed his attendants and gestured for her to remain. "Walk with me," he said. It wasn't a request, but it wasn't quite a command either. Mira gathered her materials and followed him out of the formal chamber, through a series of corridors that grew progressively less ornate, until they reached what appeared to be a private wing of the court complex. "These are my personal quarters," Draconis explained, leading her into a sprawling suite that was somehow both luxurious and comfortable, filled with books and artwork and artifacts from countless centuries. "I wanted to show you something." He crossed to a wall covered in paintings, gesturing to them. "My collection. Every piece was created by an artist I personally commissioned. This one is from 1487, a portrait by a Florentine master. This one was painted in 1623 by a young woman who later became quite famous, though history forgot that she once spent a summer painting vampires. This one is you," Mira breathed, moving closer to study a portrait that must have been from the early 1800s, based on the style and costume. The artist had captured Draconis in formal dress, standing before a window with moonlight streaming across his face. "It's beautiful. It's accurate," he corrected. "But it's not beautiful. Do you see the difference?" The artist was technically skilled, but they painted what they saw with their eyes, not with their heart. There's no life in it, no emotion. It could be anyone. Mira studied the painting more carefully, understanding what he meant. The technical execution was flawless, but there was something sterile about it, something that failed to capture the presence of the person standing beside her now. "Is that why no one has painted you in 200 years? "Partially. Also because I grew tired of being disappointed." He moved to stand beside her, both of them staring at his painted likeness. "But your sketches are different. Even the quick studies you made during the negotiations today, they capture something essential. I look at them and see myself reflected in a way I haven't experienced in centuries." "I don't understand what you want from me," Mira said quietly. Draconis turned to face her fully, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "I want you to paint me. A full portrait, properly done. Not for the court, not for any official record, for me. I'll pay you whatever you ask, give you whatever time and resources you need. In exchange, you spend time here, in my private chambers where the light is best, and you try to capture what you saw that first day when you sketched me sleeping." "I can't possibly accept payment for you can and you will," he interrupted firmly. "Your time has value, your talent has value, and what I'm asking is not insignificant. A proper portrait will require multiple sessions, hours of your time, sustained exposure to my presence which may be uncomfortable or even frightening." "You don't frighten me," Mira said, and realized as she spoke that it was true. She should be terrified, alone in the private quarters of the Vampire King, but what she felt was something entirely different. something warm and electric and dangerous in its own way. Then you're either very brave or very foolish, Draconis murmured. Possibly both. When would we start? Tomorrow, if you're willing. I can arrange for the court schedule to accommodate the sessions. Afternoons would be best, just before sunset when the light is perfect, Mira finished. Yes, I know. I saw it that first day. Something flickered in his expression there and gone too quickly for her to read. Tomorrow, then. Come at 4. The guards will be expecting you and will escort you directly here. And Mira? This is a private commission. The court doesn't need to know about it. We'll tell them you're documenting historical records if anyone asks. Mira nodded, understanding the need for discretion even if she didn't fully understand his reasons for it. She left the vampire court that evening, feeling like she had crossed some invisible threshold, stepped onto a path that would change everything. She spent the next morning preparing, gathering her finest materials and trying to calm the nervous anticipation that fluttered in her chest. She told herself it was just another commission, just another portrait, but she knew it was a lie. This felt significant in a way she couldn't quite articulate. When she arrived at 4 as instructed, she was indeed escorted directly to Draconis' private chambers. He was waiting for her, dressed more casually than she had ever seen him, in simple dark trousers and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. The informality made him somehow more striking, more real. I thought we could work near the windows, he said, gesturing to an area where the afternoon light streamed through those special filtered panes. I've set up an easel and canvas. Tell me if you need anything else. Mira examined the setup, impressed by his thoroughness. He had provided professional-grade materials, the kind she usually couldn't afford on her own. This is perfect. How do you want to be positioned? However you think best. This is your vision, not mine. She considered for a moment, then arranged him in a chair angled toward the window, one arm resting on the armrest, his body turned slightly so she could capture his profile but also the direct intensity of his gaze. It was similar to how she had first drawn him, but more deliberate, more refined. Tell me if you get uncomfortable, she'd said, beginning to sketch preliminary lines directly onto the canvas. We can take breaks whenever you need them. I can remain still for hours without discomfort, Draconis replied. One of the few advantages of vampiric physiology. Still, let me know. I want this to be collaborative, not an endurance test. They fell into a comfortable silence as Mira worked, her hands moving with practiced confidence as she blocked out the basic composition. She had done hundreds of portraits over the years, but this felt different. Every line felt weighted with significance. Every shadow seemed to carry meaning. After perhaps an hour, Draconis spoke. May I ask you questions while you work, or do you prefer silence? Questions are fine as long as you don't move too much when you talk. What made you choose art? Your file mentioned you were also talented in mathematics and science. Mira smiled slightly, adding definition to the curve of his shoulder. Art chose me, really. After my parents died, I couldn't make sense of anything. The world felt chaotic and random and cruel. But when I drew, when I painted, I could take that chaos and transform it into something beautiful or at least meaningful. It was the only thing that helped. You transform pain into beauty, Draconis observed. That's a rare gift. What about you? What made you choose to be king? Or was that not a choice? It was both chosen and inevitable, he said carefully. I was powerful, even among vampires, and power creates its own gravity. Others looked to me for leadership during the dark centuries after I was turned. Eventually, that informal authority solidified into formal rule. But there was a moment early on when I could have walked away, disappeared into obscurity. I chose to stay, to lead. Some days I wonder if that was wisdom or foolishness. Do you regret it? Regret implies I would change my choice if given the opportunity. I'm not certain I would. Leadership has been a burden, yes, but also a purpose. Without it, I might have gone mad from the sheer weight of immortality long ago. His words were matter of fact, but Mira heard the loneliness underneath them, the weariness of someone who had carried responsibility for so long it had become indistinguishable from identity. She tried to capture that in the painting, in the set of his shoulders, in the distant focus of his eyes. They continued like that over the next several hours, working in companionable silence punctuated by occasional conversations. Draconis asked about her training, her favorite artists, her dreams for the future. She asked about his long life, the changes he had witnessed, the things he missed about the past and the things he appreciated about the present. As the sun set and the light shifted from golden to deep blue, Mira finally stepped back from the canvas, stretching muscles that had grown stiff from sustained focus. We should stop for today, she said. The light's gone and I don't want to work from artificial sources for this piece. It would change the whole mood. Draconis rose from his position and came to stand beside her, studying the work in progress. "It's already remarkable," he said softly. "Even unfinished, it's more alive than any other portrait anyone has made of me." "It's just the preliminary layers," Mira protested, but she felt a flush of pleasure at his words. "The real work comes later, building up the details, refining the colors. When can we continue? Day after tomorrow? Same time?" When he nodded, she began cleaning her brushes, acutely aware of his presence just behind her. "Draconis, can I ask you something personal? You've been asking me personal questions all afternoon," he pointed out with a hint of amusement. "This is different. Why does this portrait matter so much to you?" "It's not just about having good artwork. There's something else." He was quiet for a long moment, and she thought he might not answer. Then, so softly she almost didn't hear, he said, "Because you see me as a person, and I want evidence that I was once perceived that way, even if only briefly, even if only by one mortal artist. When you're gone, turned to dust as all mortals do. I want to be able to look at this painting and remember that once, someone looked at me with compassion rather than fear." The words struck something deep in Mira's chest, painful and sweet at once. She turned to face him, finding him closer than she had realized, near enough to see the fine details of his face, the ancient sorrow in his eyes. "That's the saddest thing I've ever heard," she whispered. "That's immortality," he replied. She reached up without thinking, her paint-stained fingers coming to rest against his cheek. He went absolutely still under her touch, his eyes widening slightly in what might have been shock. His skin was cool but not cold, smooth and flawless. "I'm sorry," she said. "I shouldn't have." His hand came up to cover hers, holding it against his face. "Don't apologize. Do you know how long it's been since someone touched me with gentleness, without either terror or calculated seduction?" Mira shook her head, unable to find words. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility and danger in equal measure. Then Draconis slowly, carefully stepped back, releasing her hand. "You should go," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "It's late, and this is becoming complicated in ways that could be dangerous for you." "I'm not afraid," Mira said again. "You should be. I'm not human, Mira. I'm not safe. And the way you look at me, the way you touch me, it awakens things I've kept buried for centuries. Wants and needs and hunger that have nothing to do with blood." His honesty stole her breath. She should flee, should put distance between herself and this ancient, powerful creature who was offering her a warning wrapped in confession. Instead, she heard herself say, "Day after tomorrow, 4 o'clock, I'll be here." Something flashed in his eyes, relief, resignation, desire, all mixed together. "I'll be waiting." The next 2 days passed in a strange fog of anticipation. Mira tried to focus on her other work, on the sketches she needed to complete for the official court records, but her mind kept drifting back to those private chambers, to the painting taking shape on the canvas, to the way Draconis had looked at her in that charged moment. She knew she was wading into dangerous waters. The carefully maintained boundaries between human and vampire existed for good reasons. Relationships between the species were not forbidden, but they were rare and often tragic. Humans aged and died while vampires remained frozen in time. The power imbalance was enormous. And yet, when she was with Draconis, none of that seemed to matter. She felt seen in a way she had never experienced before, understood in a way that went beyond words. When she returned to his chambers at the appointed time, he was already positioned in the chair, waiting. But something was different. There was a tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there before, a guardedness in his expression. "Is something wrong?" Mira asked as she prepared her paints. "Lord Castellan has been asking questions about your frequent visits to my private quarters," Draconis said carefully. "I told him you were reviewing historical documents for the court archive, but he's suspicious. He thinks I'm showing you favoritism, which could be perceived as weakness by those who would like to challenge my authority. Should I stop coming?" "No," he said, sharply enough that she looked up in surprise. "No, I won't allow him to dictate my choices. But you need to be aware that there may be those who see you as a potential leverage point against me. I've increased your security detail, though you won't see them. Guards will be watching your apartment, following your movements around the city. You're having me followed. I'm having you protected," he corrected. "There's a difference. Lord Castellan is ambitious and ruthless. If he believes that causing you harm would weaken my position, he won't hesitate." The matter-of-fact delivery of this information chilled her. "Maybe I should stop coming," she said again. "Less certainly this time. I don't want to cause problems for you or put myself in danger." "You'll be safer if you continue," Draconis said. "If we stop now, it looks like I was hiding something, which will only increase suspicion. But if we proceed as planned, documenting everything with formal records that support the historical research explanation, it becomes mundane. Boring, not worth his attention. It made sense in a Machiavellian sort of way. But Mira didn't like it. She didn't like the idea of being a pawn in vampire political games, even if she understood the necessity. All right, she agreed finally. We continue. But you have to promise me something. What? If the danger becomes real, if continuing puts either of us at actual risk, you'll tell me. No noble self-sacrifice, no keeping me in the dark to protect me. I need honesty. Draconis studied her for a long moment, then nodded. I promise, now please paint. I find I'm rather eager to see how this portrait progresses. The session was different this time, the easy companionship of before now underlaid with awareness of external threats. But as Mira lost herself in the work, building up layers of color and detail, she felt the tension ease. This space, these hours with just the two of them in the painting, felt separate from the political machinations of the court. Here, they could be simply artist and subject, two people sharing time and conversation. Tell me about the first painting you ever made, Draconis said after a while. Mira smiled at the memory. I was 6, we were on vacation at the beach, and I found these beautiful shells on the shore. I spent hours arranging them in patterns on the sand, creating these elaborate designs. My mother took pictures, but the tide came in and washed everything away. I cried for hours because my art was gone. The next day, she gave me a set of watercolors and paper and told me that if I learned to paint, I could preserve my creations forever. Wise woman she was. I miss her every day. Mira added a highlight to capture the way light reflected in his eyes. What about you? Do you miss anyone from your human life? I remember almost nothing of it, Draconis admitted. I was turned over 3,000 years ago, when the world was so different it might as well have been another planet. My human memories faded centuries ago. Sometimes I wonder if I simply imagined them to begin with, constructed false histories to give myself a sense of continuity. That sounds lonely, it is. One of the unspoken truths about immortality is that eventually, you forget what it was to be anything else. The humanity leaches away year by year until you're something other, something that thinks and feels in ways that would be alien to your former self. But you still feel, Mira pointed out. You still want connection, still value art and beauty and conversation. That seems pretty human to me. Perhaps you're right. Or perhaps I'm simply very good at mimicking humanity. But there was a slight smile on his lips as he said it, and Mira chose to take that as a good sign. They worked until the light faded again, and Mira found herself reluctant to leave, to step back out into the real world where politics and danger lurked. Here in this suspended space of creation, everything felt simple and right. Over the following weeks, the portrait took shape. Mira visited Draconis's chambers 3 times a week, each session lasting 3 to 4 hours. They talked about everything and nothing: art, history, philosophy, the small details of daily life. She learned that he loved music but couldn't play any instruments because vampire strength made it impossible to handle them with the required delicacy. He discovered that she had a weakness for terrible horror movies and an inexplicable fear of butterflies. The painting evolved layer by careful layer, becoming something more than just a portrait. It was a conversation in paint, a documentation of all these hours spent together. Mira poured everything into it, her growing understanding of who he was beneath the crown and the power, the complexity she saw in him, the unexpected tenderness he showed in unguarded moments. She was falling in love with him. She knew it was foolish and dangerous and ultimately doomed, but she couldn't seem to stop. Every session drew her deeper under his spell, though she suspected the spell was less about vampire magic and more about the simple human ache of finally feeling understood by someone. And he felt it too. She could see it in the way he watched her work, in the soft expression that crossed his face when she said something that pleased him, in the careful way he avoided touching her, as if he knew that one more contact might shatter the fragile professional boundary they were pretending still existed. The portrait was nearly complete when everything changed. Mira arrived for their scheduled session to find the normally serene private wing in chaos. Guards were stationed at every entrance, and the tension in the air was palpable. She was stopped and thoroughly searched before being allowed to proceed, something that had never happened before. Draconis was standing by the windows, staring out at the city, his posture rigid with barely contained rage. He didn't turn when she entered, though she knew he was aware of her presence. "What happened?" she asked quietly. "Lord Castellan made his move," Draconis said, his voice cold and flat. "He challenged my authority in open court this morning, claiming I had grown weak and distracted, unfit to lead. He cited my obsession with a human artist as evidence of my declining judgment." Mira's stomach dropped. "I'm so sorry. I should never have. Don't." He turned to face her, and his eyes were glowing that deep red that meant strong emotion. "Don't you dare apologize for his ambition and cruelty. This was inevitable. He's been planning this for decades, and he would have found some excuse regardless. You're simply the convenient focus. What happens now? Now I deal with it. The challenge has been issued according to the old laws, which means I must either face him in formal combat or abdicate. His smile was sharp and humorless. I have no intention of abdication. Combat, Mira repeated, feeling cold. You mean to the death, yes. Or close enough to it. The fight will take place tomorrow at sunset in the traditional arena beneath the court complex. It's barbaric and antiquated, but it's our law. Can you win? Almost certainly. I'm older and more powerful than Castellan by nearly 2 millennia. But he's vicious and clever, and he'll fight without honor. There's always risk. He crossed to where she stood frozen near the easel, which is why I need to ask something of you. Anything. If I fall tomorrow, if Castellan wins and becomes king, you need to run. Immediately. Don't wait, don't gather belongings, just flee the city. I've made arrangements. There's a car that will be waiting in the garage, keys under the floor mat, with cash and documents that will get you somewhere safe. Promise me you'll go. Draconis. Promise me, Mira. He gripped her shoulders, his touch gentle despite the intensity of his words. He'll kill you just to prove a point, to erase evidence of my weakness. You cannot stay here if I lose. I promise, she whispered, even as tears burned her eyes. But you're not going to lose, you can't. I don't intend to. But immortality has taught me that intention and outcome don't always align. He released her shoulders, stepping back. I'm sorry, this isn't how I wanted this to go. The portrait is almost finished, Mira interrupted. We could complete it now. If you have time before you need to prepare for tomorrow. You want to work? Now? I want to finish what we started, she said firmly. And I want you to have this, regardless of what happens tomorrow. You said you wanted evidence that someone saw you as a person. Let me give you that. Something in his expression cracked, a lifetime of careful control slipping for just a moment to reveal the raw emotion beneath. All right, he said quietly. Let's finish it. He took his position by the window, but the atmosphere was completely different from their previous sessions. The easy companionship was gone, replaced by desperate urgency. Mira worked with fierce focus, adding the final details, refining the play of light and shadow, trying to capture everything she felt for him in every brushstroke. They didn't speak. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been communicated in the weeks of quiet conversations and shared silences. Instead, they existed in that suspended moment, artist and subject connected by something that transcended words. When Mira finally stepped back, the painting was complete. She had captured him in that perfect afternoon light, his expression contemplative but not distant, powerful but not cruel. There was wisdom in those painted eyes and sorrow, and something else, a spark of hope perhaps, or the echo of someone who had remembered how to be seen. Draconis came to stand beside her, staring at the painting in silence. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. It's perfect. It's everything I hoped for and more. You've given me an extraordinary gift, Mira Langley. You gave me one first, she replied. These weeks, these conversations, they've meant more to me than I can express. You've made me feel less alone in the world. He turned to her then, and the raw longing in his eyes stole her breath. I have spent 3,000 years existing but not living, ruling but not feeling, and then you walked into my life with your sketchbook and your compassionate gaze, and reminded me what it was to want something beyond mere existence. That's the real gift. Draconis, she whispered, reaching for him. He caught her hand, bringing it to his lips in a gesture so old-fashioned and tender that her heart ached. If I survive tomorrow, he said against her skin, if I win and secure my throne and eliminate this threat, I want to pursue this properly. Not as king and subject, not as immortal and mortal, but as two people who have found something rare and precious in each other. Would you allow me that? Yes, Mira said without hesitation. Yes, absolutely yes. He pulled her close then, wrapping her in an embrace that felt both protective and desperate. She buried her face against his chest, feeling the absence of a heartbeat but the presence of something else, something that mattered more. Then I will win, he murmured into her hair, because I have something to fight for beyond mere survival. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other as the sun set and the room darkened around them. Eventually, Draconis pulled back, cupping her face in his cool hands. You need to go now, he said gently. I have preparations to make, and you shouldn't be here when the other court members arrive for the pre-combat rituals. But remember your promise. If things go wrong, I run, I know. But they won't go wrong. You're going to win, and then we're going to figure out how to make this work. His smile was genuine this time, warm despite the circumstances. Your faith is humbling. It's earned, she corrected. Now go be the terrifying vampire king and remind Lord Castellan why challenging you was the worst decision of his very long life. That startled a laugh out of him, bright and unexpected. "As my lady commands." Mira left the court that evening with her heart in her throat, the completed portrait carefully wrapped and left in Draconis's care. She had wanted to take it home, to keep working on it, but he had insisted it should stay there, in his chambers, where it belonged. That night was the longest of her life. She tried to sleep, to distract herself with television or books, but nothing worked. Her mind kept returning to that arena beneath the court complex, to the brutal combat that would take place at sunset, to all the ways this could go wrong. She thought about running, about getting in her car and fleeing the city before the fight even began. But she couldn't make herself do it. If Draconis died, she wanted to know. She owed him that much, to bear witness to his fate rather than learning about it secondhand. When the sun began to set the next day, Mira made a decision. She dressed carefully, putting on her most professional clothes, gathering her sketchbook and supplies. Then she made her way to the vampire court, walking past confused guards who tried to stop her. "I'm the official court artist," she said firmly. "I'm here to document the challenge combat for the historical records." It was a flimsy excuse, but it was technically within her rights. The guards exchanged uncertain looks, then reluctantly let her pass. She made her way through the complex, following the sound of voices and the press of bodies, until she reached the entrance to the underground arena. The space was ancient and terrifying. A vast circular chamber carved from living rock with tiers of seating surrounding a central fighting area. It was already packed with vampires from the court and beyond, all gathered to witness the challenge. The air hummed with anticipation and bloodlust. Mira found a spot near the back and set up her materials with shaking hands. Several vampires noticed her presence and whispered among themselves, but no one stopped her. Perhaps they thought she had permission. Perhaps they simply didn't care what happened to one human artist in the aftermath of what was about to unfold. The combatants entered from opposite sides of the arena. Lord Castellan came first, moving with predatory grace, already stripped to the waist to reveal a warrior's physique. He was smiling, confident, and cruel. Then Draconis entered, and the entire atmosphere shifted. He moved like death itself, every step measured and purposeful. He wore simple black clothing, his white hair unbound and flowing past his shoulders. His expression was completely calm, but his eyes glowed with that deep red light that spoke of power barely contained. The two vampires faced each other across the arena floor as an ancient elder stepped forward to recite the formal rules. The combat would continue until one party yielded, was incapacitated, or was destroyed. No weapons were permitted beyond the natural abilities of their kind. The winner would take the throne and all that came with it. Mira's pencil moved frantically across the pages, capturing every detail even as fear threatened to choke her. This was insane. She should never have come. But she couldn't look away. The elder stepped back and the fight began. It was brutal and beautiful and terrifying all at once. The two vampires moved with speed that human eyes could barely track, clashing together with impacts that sent shockwaves through the stone floor. Castellan fought with vicious efficiency, going for vulnerable points with calculated precision. But Draconis was something else entirely, his movements almost balletic in their grace despite the violence. Blood was spilled, vampire blood that glowed faintly in the torchlight. Both combatants bore injuries within minutes, gashes that would have killed a human, but only seemed to enrage the immortals further. The watching vampires roared their approval. Caught up in the ancient ritual of succession through combat, Mira sketched through tears, her hands moving on autopilot as she tried to process what she was witnessing. Every time Draconis took a hit, she felt it like a physical blow. Every time he landed an attack, she felt a surge of fierce pride. The fight raged for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Castellan was good, dangerously skilled, and he fought without honor just as Draconis had predicted. But Draconis was better. More than that, he was motivated by something beyond ambition or pride. He was fighting for a future he had barely allowed himself to imagine. The end came suddenly. Castellan overextended on a lunge, going for what should have been a killing blow. Draconis sidestepped with impossible speed, caught his opponent's arm and twisted. There was a sickening crack, and then Draconis had Castellan on his knees, one hand wrapped around his throat, claws extended and pressing against vulnerable flesh. The arena fell silent. "Yield," Draconis commanded, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast space. Castellan's face twisted with rage and humiliation, but he was beaten and he knew it. "I yield," he ground out. Draconis held him there for a moment longer, making sure everyone present understood the power dynamic, then released him with a contemptuous shove. Castellan collapsed to the ground, bleeding and broken but alive. "Take him to the healers," Draconis ordered. When he recovers, he is banished from this court and these territories. If he returns, I will finish what I started here today." Guards moved forward to collect the fallen vampire as the crowd erupted in cheers and shouts. Draconis stood in the center of the arena, bloody and victorious, every inch the ancient king he had claimed to be. Then his eyes found Mira in the crowd, and his expression transformed from cold authority to something infinitely warmer. She was moving before she consciously decided to, pushing through the press of bodies, ignoring the outraged protests of vampires who thought a human had no business descending to the arena floor. She didn't care about protocol or propriety or any of it. She just needed to reach him. Draconis met her halfway, and then she was in his arms, held against him despite the blood and the dirt and the watching crowd. She felt his chest heave with unnecessary breath, felt the tension gradually drain from his body. "You weren't supposed to be here," he murmured against her hair. "I couldn't stay away. I needed to see, I had to know." "Shh. I know." He pulled back just enough to look at her, his eyes fading from red back to that shifting amber gold. "You sketched the fight. I could see you up there, drawing away like your life depended on it. I document truth, remember? You told me that's what you wanted." His laugh was shaky with relief and residual adrenaline. "So I did. Come on. Let's get out of here before someone remembers to be scandalized by your presence." He led her out of the arena, still holding her close, and the crowd parted before them. Mira heard whispers and gasps, saw shock and speculation on countless faces, but none of it mattered. Draconis was alive. They had won. Back in his private chambers, cleaned up and changed into fresh clothes, Draconis finally allowed himself to collapse onto one of his sofas. Mira sat beside him, close enough to touch but giving him space to process. "I'm sorry you had to witness that," he said quietly. "That level of violence, the brutality of our laws, it's not something humans should have to see." "I'm not sorry I was there," Mira countered. "I was terrified every second, but I wouldn't have wanted to be anywhere else. And now I have a complete visual record of the challenge, which means no one can dispute what happened or try to rewrite history later. Always thinking practically, even in the midst of chaos." He reached for her hand, lacing their fingers together. "The court knows about us now. They saw me embrace you, saw the way I looked at you. There's no hiding it anymore. Is that a problem? It will be complicated. There will be those who see it as weakness, others who see it as opportunity. Lady Seraphine has already sent word requesting an audience, no doubt to offer her thoughts on the matter." His grip on her hand tightened slightly. "But I don't care. I've spent 3,000 years worrying about perception and politics. For once I'm choosing something simply because I want it." "And what is it you want?" Mira asked softly. He turned to face her fully, bringing his free hand up to cup her cheek. "You this. Whatever we can build together, however long we have. I know the obstacles. You'll age while I stay the same. Our worlds are fundamentally different. There will be those who oppose us at every turn. But I want to try anyway. If you're willing." "I'm willing," Mira said, leaning into his touch. "I'm terrified and uncertain about so many things, but I'm willing. These past weeks with you have been the most meaningful of my life. Whatever time we can have together, whatever form it takes, I want that." Draconis kissed her then, gentle and careful, as if she were something precious that might shatter under too much pressure. Mira melted into it, tasting blood and possibility in equal measure, feeling the coolness of his lips against hers and not caring about the lack of warmth, because there was heat enough in the emotion behind the kiss. When they finally broke apart, both breathing harder than necessary, Draconis rested his forehead against hers. "There are things we'll need to discuss," he murmured. "Practicalities and protections. If you're going to be in my life openly, you'll need more security, training in court politics, perhaps even property within the court complex so you don't have to travel back and forth." "That sounds like you're asking me to move in," Mira said, slightly dazed. "Eventually, if you'd like. Not immediately. I understand humans need time to adjust to major changes. But yes, that's the general direction of my thoughts." It should have felt too fast, too much, too overwhelming. Instead, it felt right. Mira had been alone for so long, adrift since her parents died, and now she had found something to anchor herself to. Someone who saw her completely and valued what he saw. "Let's take it one step at a time," she suggested. "But I'm not opposed to the idea." "One step at a time," Draconis agreed, "starting with you getting some actual rest. You look exhausted and you've had a traumatic day." "I'm not leaving you tonight," Mira said firmly. "Not after everything. I'll sleep here, on your sofa if necessary, but I'm staying." "You won't sleep on a sofa. There are guest chambers attached to this suite, fully furnished and quite comfortable. You're welcome to stay there as often as you like." It was a compromise, a way of having her close without pushing too far too fast. Mira accepted gratefully. suddenly aware of how bone-deep exhausted she truly was. The adrenaline crash was hitting hard, and she could barely keep her eyes open. Draconis showed her to the guest room, which was more luxurious than any hotel she had ever stayed in, with a massive bed and a private bathroom with a tub that could practically double as a pool. "Rest," he said from the doorway. "I have court business to attend to, meetings that can't be postponed even after a challenge combat. But I'll be nearby if you need anything. Just call out, I'll hear you." Vampire hearing? One of the few truly useful benefits, he confirmed with a small smile. "Sleep well, Mira Langley. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow." She slept better than she had in weeks, wrapped in sheets that smelled faintly of him, secure in the knowledge that he was alive and victorious and hers in whatever complicated way they could manage. The next weeks were an exercise in adjustment. Mira continued her official duties as court artist, documenting proceedings and negotiations. But now everyone knew she was also the Vampire King's lover. The relationship was unprecedented in recent court history, and it generated endless speculation and gossip. Some vampires were curious, treating Mira with cautious respect. Others were openly hostile, viewing her as a distraction or a weakness to be exploited. Lady Seraphine surprisingly became something of an ally, perhaps sensing political advantage in supporting the relationship, or perhaps simply approving of anything that humanized Draconis in the eyes of his subjects. Mira moved most of her belongings into the guest chambers, which gradually transformed into her private studio and living space within the court complex. She kept her apartment in the city for the sake of maintaining some independence. But more and more she found herself preferring the vampire court, despite its dangers and complications. She and Draconis navigated their relationship carefully, learning each other's boundaries and needs. He was protective to an almost overbearing degree, constantly worried about her safety, insisting on guards and protocols that sometimes felt suffocating. But he also gave her space when she needed it, respected her independence, and never tried to control her art or her choices. They spent evenings together, talking and reading and simply existing in companionable silence. He showed her his extensive library, introducing her to rare books and ancient texts. She taught him about modern art movements and contemporary culture, filling in the gaps in his knowledge. And slowly, carefully, they built something real. The portrait remained in his private chambers, hung in a place of honor where he could see it from his favorite chair. He often sat staring at it in the evenings, and when Mira asked what he was thinking, he would pull her close and murmur about memory and perception and gratitude. 3 months after the challenge combat, Draconis surprised her with a formal proposal not of marriage, which was complicated in vampire society, but of permanent bonding. It was a vampire custom, ancient and binding, that would mark her as his in the eyes of all supernatural beings. It would offer her some protection, establish her position in the court, and formalize what they both already knew to be true. "I understand if you need time to consider," he said, after explaining the ritual and its implications. "This is not something to be entered into lightly. Once bonded, we would be linked in ways that go beyond mere relationship. You would feel my emotions, sense my presence, be marked by my power. Would you feel mine as well?" Mira asked. "Yes. It's reciprocal, though the effects manifest differently for humans than for vampires." Mira considered for only a moment before answering. "Yes, I want this. I want to be bonded to you." The ceremony took place in a private ritual attended only by the inner court and a few close allies. It involved blood Mira's freely given, mixed with Draconis's in an ancient ceremony and vows spoken in a language so old even most vampires had forgotten it. When it was complete, Mira felt a presence settle into her consciousness, warm and familiar and unmistakably his. She could sense his emotions like an undercurrent to her own, feel his presence even when he was rooms away. "Is it always this intense?" she asked, dizzy from the sensation. "It will settle," Draconis assured her, supporting her as she adjusted to the new awareness. "In a few days it will feel natural, like breathing." He was right. Within a week the bond had integrated itself into her existence so thoroughly she couldn't imagine being without it. She loved the constant awareness of him, the way she always knew if he was stressed or content or amused. And she loved knowing he could feel her emotions as well, that there were no secrets between them, no hidden feelings or unspoken needs. Life settled into a new rhythm. Mira continued her art, creating pieces that gained recognition far beyond the supernatural community. A major gallery in the city offered her a show, featuring her portraits and studies from the vampire court. It was a massive success, establishing her as one of the most innovative portrait artists of her generation. Draconis attended the opening, creating a minor sensation as the Vampire King mingled with human art collectors and critics. He stood before the portrait she had created of him, the one from those first sessions when everything was new and uncertain, and studied it with that same intense focus he had shown the day she completed it. "This is the piece that changed everything," he said to her later, as they stood in the gallery after most of the guests had departed. "The moment I saw myself through your eyes, I remembered what it was to be more than a king, more than a monster. I remembered personhood." "You were always a person," Mira corrected gently. "You just needed someone to remind you. And you did. You continue to do so every day." He pulled her close, oblivious to the few remaining gallery patrons who watched with fascination. "I want to show you something. Will you come with me?" Intrigued, Mira followed him out of the gallery and into the waiting car. They drove through the city as night deepened, eventually arriving at a property she had never seen before, a beautiful historical building that had been converted into artist studios. "I purchased this," Draconis explained as he led her inside. "It's yours if you want it. A proper studio space where you can work on larger projects, host other artists, maybe even teach if that interests you. I know the chambers at court are comfortable, but you need space that's truly your own, designed for creation rather than accommodation." Mira walked through the space, overwhelmed by the generosity and the thoughtfulness. The main studio had massive windows with northern exposure, perfect light for painting. There were smaller rooms for storage and preparation, a gallery area for displaying finished works, even a small apartment on the upper floor for when she wanted to stay here overnight. "This is too much," she whispered. "It's not nearly enough," Draconis countered. "You gave me back my humanity. The least I can do is support your art." She turned to face him, tears streaming down her face, and pulled him into a fierce embrace. "I love you," she said, the words simple but weighted with absolute truth. "I love you so much it terrifies me." "I love you as well," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. "More than I believed myself still capable of loving. You are precious to me, Mira, more precious than power or position or immortality itself." They made the studio their own over the following months. Mira worked there during the days, creating new pieces and experimenting with techniques she had never tried before. Draconis visited in the evenings, after sunset, and they would talk about her work, about court politics, about the strange and beautiful life they were building together. The question of Mira's mortality hung between them, unspoken but always present. She was 26 now, and while that was young by any measure, the awareness that she would age while he remained frozen was impossible to ignore. They both knew that eventually, they would have to make difficult decisions about how to handle the inevitable progression of time. The answer came unexpectedly, during a visit from an ancient vampire named Aurelius Nightshade, one of the few beings older than Draconis himself. He had heard about the bonding, about the unprecedented relationship between the vampire king and a human artist, and he had come to offer counsel. "There is a way," Aurelius said, speaking to both of them in Draconis's private chambers. "It is rare and not without risk, but it can be done. A human bonded to a vampire of sufficient age and power can be turned while maintaining the bond intact. The process is different from a normal turning cleaner, more controlled, with less risk of madness or loss of self." Mira felt Draconis's shock through their bond, followed quickly by hope and fear in equal measure. "I've never heard of this," Draconis said carefully. "Because it's ancient knowledge, known only to the eldest of us, and because it requires the vampire to make a choice most are unwilling to make, to share immortality with another, knowing that you will be bound to them for all eternity. If the relationship sours, if feelings change over the millennia, there is no escape. You would be connected forever." "Would she retain who she is?" Draconis asked. "Her humanity, her emotions, her artistic vision?" "More so than a conventional turning, yes. The bond acts as an anchor, preserving the core of her identity even as she transforms. But understand, she would still become a vampire. She would need to drink blood, would be vulnerable to sunlight, would live by our laws and customs." Aurelius turned his attention to Mira. "This is not a decision to make lightly, young one. Immortality is both gift and curse. The weight of endless years, the loss of human connections as everyone you know ages and dies, the slow transformation of the self as centuries reshape you. These are not small considerations. But we would face them together," Mira said, looking at Draconis. "That's what you're saying, isn't it? If I were turned, if I became vampire through this bonded process, we would have forever." "Yes," Aurelius confirmed. "For better or worse, for all eternity, you would have each other." After Aurelius departed, Mira and Draconis talked deep into the night. It was the most serious conversation they had ever had, weighing possibilities and consequences, dreams and fears. "I won't pressure you," Draconis said. "This has to be entirely your choice. If you want to live a normal human life, To age naturally and experience mortality as nature intended, I will support that. We'll have the years we have, and I will treasure every moment. And then watch me die while you go on forever? Mira shook her head. I don't want that. I want more time. I want centuries to explore art and love and existence with you. But I'm also terrified. What if I change in ways that make me unrecognizable? What if vampire nature overwhelms human compassion? The bond will anchor you, Draconis reminded her. And I will be there every step of the way, helping you navigate the transformation. You won't be alone in this. When would we do it? If I decide yes? Not immediately. You should have time to experience human life, to be certain this is what you want. Perhaps in a few years, when you've had time to consider fully. But Mira found that once the possibility had been raised, she couldn't stop thinking about it. The idea of forever with Draconis, of having the time to create without the pressure of mortality, of building something lasting, it called to her. 6 months later, on the anniversary of their bonding, she gave him her answer. I want this, she said. I want to be turned, to become vampire, to spend eternity with you. Not because I'm afraid of dying, but because I'm excited about living. Really living, with time to explore everything I want to explore. Draconis pulled her close, and she felt his relief and joy through their bond. Are you certain? Absolutely certain. When can we do it? We'll need to prepare. The ritual requires specific conditions, rare components, and Aurelius's guidance. Perhaps a month, maybe 2. The next weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. Mira put her human affairs in order, though there wasn't much to manage. She had no family, few close friends beyond the relationships she had formed in the supernatural community. Her apartment was already mostly empty. Her studio would continue to be hers regardless of her nature. She created a final piece as a human, a self-portrait that captured who she was in this moment, before the transformation. She wanted to preserve this version of herself, to have a record of the person she had been when everything was ready. The ritual took place in a chamber deep beneath the court complex, in a space so old even Draconis wasn't certain of its origins. Aurelius guided them through the process, speaking words in languages that predated written history. The turning itself was less painful than Mira had feared, perhaps because of the bond, or perhaps because of Draconis's age and control. She felt his blood enter her system, burning through her veins like liquid fire, rewriting her biology at the most fundamental level. She felt her heart slow, her breathing change, her senses sharpen and expand. And through it all, she felt Draconis in her mind, anchoring her, reminding her of who she was and who she chose to be. When she woke 3 days later, the world was different. Colors were more vivid, sounds more complex, scents overwhelming in their intensity. And beneath it all was hunger, a need for blood that was instinctive and undeniable. Draconis was there, helping her through those first disorienting moments, teaching her control, showing her how to feed without losing herself to the hunger. It was difficult, overwhelming at times, but she never faced it alone. The bond had strengthened during her transformation, deepening until their connection felt absolute. She could sense his thoughts more clearly now, feel his emotions as if they were her own, and he could do the same with her, creating a level of intimacy that went beyond anything they had experienced before. How do you feel? He asked after she had gained enough control to speak coherently. Strange, powerful, hungry, like myself, but more so. She looked at her hands, noting the slight pallor of her skin, the way light seemed to play across it differently. I'm vampire now, you are. How you always were meant to be, I think. He kissed her forehead gently. Welcome to immortality, my love. We have forever ahead of us. And they did. Mira adapted to vampire existence faster than anyone had anticipated. Perhaps because of the bond, or perhaps because of her natural resilience. She learned to feed without guilt, accepting it as part of her nature. She discovered new abilities, enhanced speed and strength, the ability to sense blood and emotion, the power that came with being bonded to the vampire king himself. Her art evolved, taking on new dimensions now that she perceived the world through vampire senses. She could capture light and shadow with unprecedented accuracy, convey emotion with a depth that had been impossible before. Critics called her work transcendent, not knowing that the artist herself had transcended human limitations. Years passed, then decades. Mira and Draconis ruled the vampire court together, an unprecedented partnership that gradually became accepted and then celebrated. They navigated immortal politics, faced challenges both external and internal, and through it all maintained the connection that had begun with a simple sketch of a sleeping king. The original portrait remained in their chambers, a reminder of where they had started. Sometimes, usually late at night when the court was quiet, they would sit together and look at it, remembering those uncertain early days when everything was new and terrifying and full of possibility. Do you regret it? Draconis asked once. decades into their immortal life together. Giving up humanity, choosing this existence? Mira considered the question seriously, as she always did when he asked it. No, she said finally. I miss some things: sunlight, the simple pleasures of human food, the innocence of not knowing what darkness lurks in the world. But I don't regret choosing you, choosing this life, choosing forever. Every moment with you has been worth whatever I gave up, even when I'm overbearing and protective and far too concerned with court politics. Especially then, she said with a smile. You're the vampire king. If you weren't at least a little overbearing, I'd worry something was wrong. He laughed, pulling her close. I love you, Mira Langley. Across eternity, through every challenge and change, I will always love you. And I love you, Draconis Valdren. My king, my partner, my eternal companion. They had forever ahead of them, and forever had never looked more beautiful. Outside their windows, the modern city glittered with lights, humanity going about its business, unaware of the ancient love story unfolding in the vampire court above them. But in this moment, none of that mattered. What mattered was the bond between them, forged in sketches and refined in blood, a connection that would endure as long as immortality itself. The vampire king and his artist, bound together by choice and love and the simple act of being seen, faced eternity together. And if anyone had asked them whether it was worth it, the danger, the sacrifice, the complicated navigation of two very different worlds, they would have answered without hesitation. Yes, 1,000 times yes, forever yes. And in a chamber deep within the vampire court, a portrait hung on the wall, a white-haired king captured in afternoon light, peaceful and vulnerable and utterly human despite his immortal nature. It was a testament to the moment when everything changed, when a simple sketch became the foundation for an eternal love. It was, and would remain forever, the most important piece of art either of them would ever create. Not the painting itself, but what it represented: the willingness to see, to be seen, to take the risk of connection even when every logical reason argued against it. That was the real masterpiece. And it would endure, preserved not in paint and canvas but in the endless years they would share, for as long as immortality itself.